Hello, and welcome to today's RIMS webinar titled Stranded in Excel, Moving Beyond Basic Technology for ERM. I'm Megan, and I'll be the operator for the presentation today. A few notes before we begin. If you have a question for the presenter during today's session, please submit them by writing in the question box. You can submit them at any time, but we will reserve time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. If we do not have enough time to answer all your questions, we will answer them by email after the live session. A copy of the PowerPoint presentation is available under the Handout tab. Now, I'd like to turn today's presentation over to our speakers, Ollie de Boer, Technology Lead, Setarla, Jamie Gahunia, Strategic Product Manager, ERM Resolver, and Brian Link, Managing Director, Mobius One.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining Resolver's webinar. Celeste Duke is actually also our fourth speaker. Welcome to today's session, which is Stranded in Excel, Moving Beyond Basic Technology for ERM. Today's session is a panel discussion with three ERM technology leaders to discuss our love-hate relationship with spreadsheets. We can't live with them, but can we live without them? I want to introduce myself as moderator for today's session. I'm Jamie Gahunia, Product Manager at Resolver. I have been involved with many ERM program implementations in the past, and also have an internal audit and risk background. So I have had my fair share of being buried under spreadsheets. For those who haven't heard of Resolver, we are one of few recognized risk management software providers on the Gartner's Magic Quadrant. So this would include risk, security, business continuity, internal audit, compliance, and IT risk. So to start off, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves and to tell the audience a bit about their career and experience with ERM tech. We'll start with Brian, then Ollie, then Celeste.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Hello, everyone. And yeah, I started my career as it pertains to risk management as a partner with Ernst & Young for a number of years in the risk advisory practice. And the initial foray into risk management technology was I'll call the wonderful catalyst of Sarbanes-Oxley, and that spurred the development of a lot of cloud-based platforms for managing risk, albeit financial reporting risk. And although a lot of companies were unhappy about the added costs associated with SOX compliance, I think what I saw at the time was board members and CFOs really enjoyed knowing that material financial reporting risks were identified, documented, and so forth. And now as CEO of Mobius One, I see that same appetite at nonprofit and cooperative organizations, particularly at the board level, for that simple yet powerful view of key risks and most importantly, what's being done responsive to those risks and the risks in particular that are impacting business objectives.
Ollie?
Oh, hi. Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Jamie, for the intro there. So I'm Ollie de Boer, and I work with Setarla. We're a risk management consultancy firm, and we specialize in training, consultancy, and research services. And I've been working with Setarla for approximately about 2.5 years. Currently, I'm the technology lead, so I'm leading on all projects related to kind of software around enterprise risk management and other kind of technology-related opportunities. And we do work quite closely with Resolver as a company as well. Prior to that, prior to being at Setarla, I was at G4S for about 5 years, and I started there doing frontline risk management, so understanding what it is in the day-to-day operations of a business, what that means in terms of their risk landscape. I did project management for a year for a region there, and then I was the group risk manager there for several years, and I was helping to basically run the enterprise risk management program across this massive organization. If you don't know it, it's the world's largest private security company, and it operates across about 150 jurisdictions at the time when I was helping to run ERM. And that also included a software project. So we put in place a technology solution to manage our risks, our self-assessments, and internal audit. So what I kind of bring is I understand the challenges of ERM technology and living in spreadsheets prior to that, but from both sides of the fence. Currently a consultant, but I was an internal risk manager.
And
And I'm Celeste Duke. I'm a senior manager at EY. I actually lead our Canadian national GRC practice, and I've been focused in this space for a number of years. So I tend to work with clients through helping them throughout their entire GRC journey. So whether it's selecting the right tool to meet their needs, to helping them get ready for a tool. So what processes, frameworks, taxonomies do they need to have in place in order for a tool implementation to be successful, as well as helping them through the actual implementation of a solution. So I've seen clients of different sizes struggle through using manual process, Excel, and various tools to try to solve their risk, and trying to make the decision of when is it the right time to move to an actual software, and when am I actually ready to do that. So very happy to be part of today's panel to discuss some of the experiences and struggles that I've seen through my career at EY.
Thanks, Celeste. Just to help our speakers tailor their responses to the audience, we have a quick poll to confirm who we have on the line. So our first poll question is, what are you currently using to manage your ERM program? Excellent. So I can see from the results that we have a high percentage of spreadsheets being the main tool of ERM. Before we discuss any tools in the spreadsheets, I'd like to ask our panelists about understanding and collecting risk data itself. Ollie, this question is for you. In your opinion, what kind of data is the most valuable to the ERM function?
Thanks, Jamie. And yeah, as the slide says there, data, data, data. Where do we start? It's a good question. I think before we really tackle this question, we need to kind of dial it back and say, okay, what is the purpose of the enterprise risk management function? You know, there's broadly like four main functions you could argue of an enterprise risk management function. You're trying to align your risk, your strategy, and your performance. You're ensuring there's risk governance in place. You're managing the ERM process, and you're trying to kind of enhance and roll out a risk culture across an organization. Now, a technology solution isn't going to be the be all and end all of all of those things, right? It's essentially about collecting data and managing that ERM process. So if you think about what we're trying to achieve with technology and software, it's really about efficiency in terms of identifying risks and getting them into the software in the first place, assessing them, responding to them, prioritizing those ones that are the most important for management and action. And you know, there's the main purpose is really, I mean, you could put it into three broad camps. Let's support the organization to achieve its goals and its objectives. Let's work on that risk assessment process there. So what is it in terms of identification, prioritization, and management that we need to be thinking about? And this covers all of our risks, so opportunities and threats. And a lot of the times these solutions they can focus on the downside of risk management, which is, you know, looking at threats predominantly. But it's important to make sure that when we're collecting our data, we are bringing through those opportunities as well. Action management as well, that's a really important part of what we need to be doing. So, and then finally, sort of reporting as well. So we need to get data in, but we also need to get data out. So it's very important that we have a reporting mechanism that supports effective decision making across the organization. And thinking about that kind of that data in, data out process, and what kind of data would be most valuable. A lot of the times when people, especially if you're embedded in spreadsheets, you get very focused on the actual process itself rather than, and when you're migrating to a technology solution, what you may find is quite different is you're moving towards a solution where you're getting, you have a much slicker front end for getting data in, and you have a reporting engine on the back end for making better decisions and getting data out, essentially. But something you need to consider is, okay, so we know we need to make better decisions. What's the kind of data that we should be collecting in the first place to make those decisions? How are we building these reports? How are we going to collect it on the front end? So things to think about there in terms of picking up that valuable data is, what does this front end look like? Is it slick? What is my reporting engine on the back end like? Have I got a kind of a native inbuilt good reporting function? Or am I using a third-party application that has a specific skill set and I need to train myself up on that? Yeah, the database part in the middle, which is, you know, your spreadsheets at the moment, they're almost like the least important part of the whole process there. That's something that the ERM team will own in the center, but thinking about data in and data out is really important. So to give some kind of more specific examples about what we mean there, you know, what do I mean by data that we're collecting? So the most obvious one is risks, right? That's why we're all here. We need to be collecting information on risks, but really importantly as well, we should be collecting information about the relationship between our risks. And any software technology solution that you're using, it should be able to map the relationship between risks, because that's really how risks work in the real world. We know they're not isolated static events. They do interrelate. When one occurs, it may lead to another one occurring, or maybe an indicator another one is about to occur. We should also collect information around our objectives, because as I just mentioned before, around, you know, aligning risk, strategy, and objectives. If our risks aren't tied to some sort of objective, then they're a bit abstract, and they're possibly not linking back to the strategy of your organization. If we know we have certainty around or control around our risks, then we have more certainty that we're going to achieve our objectives and therefore our strategy. We want to be collecting information around risk assessment in terms of how we're prioritizing our risks for management. There's various different ways that we can be doing that. So if we think about a very common way of doing that is likelihood versus impact on a matrix. We could change that up a bit. You know, quite a lot of good technology solutions will allow you to put impact or any kind of metric you like on that matrix. So you could have impact versus control effectiveness, for example, or velocity, things like that. We also want to collect information around our controls, so how we're managing our risks, and again, the relationship between our controls. What does that total control environment look like in your organization? Actions, this is a really important part. This is where spreadsheets really fall down, because spreadsheets don't do action management. There's no way of sending out actions via spreadsheets. Indicators, so anything that's going to automate sort of monitoring of a risk being more likely to occur or not, it's a good thing to collect too. And let's think about where we're pulling all this information from across the organization. So it's going to come from, you know, different levels of the organization. We've got the front line, and this is where you're going to have your sort of like day-to-day risks, which are going to, you know, impact you quite quickly. It could be like a health and safety type of risk, all the way through to your sort of projects and programs and your longer term risks, so the strategic level of the organization. Yeah, it's basically,
okay, excellent.
Yeah, thanks, no, Jamie.
That's good. That's good, Ollie. I'm just cautious of the poll questions that are coming up next. No, that's excellent. It's a good insight as to all the data that's being collected, which leads on to poll number 2. So in addition to the valuable data, I'd like to briefly switch to the risk management adoption, just to inform our panelists as to the top challenges facing your risk department. So what is your biggest challenge in risk management right now? And Brian, if I can get you to comment on the results when it comes out.
Okay. Well, the biggest challenge here, over 2/3 saying that the time spent on reporting, collecting, aggregating, analyzing I think that's very, very much in line with what we hear anecdotally and why we've got so many people on the call today. This speaks in particular to the data collection mechanism, which tends to be Excel. Even just the simple benefit of increased efficiency, if you say, okay, well, how are we doing this? How are we collecting and assessing data related to risks, controls, et cetera? And looking at the amount of time that's invested and the quality of the outputs and the challenges around aggregating the data, making sure you've got version control all right, you're cat herding, trying to get the data together. That all speaks to the responses that I think that we just saw there on the page, that it's a lot of it's simply about the inefficiencies of using spreadsheets and other manual processes to get the information together.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. So considering some of the challenges that have been identified by the audience, Celeste, this question is for you. How do we determine the point in which we are ready or mature enough for software? What are some of the questions to ask when determining this readiness? And can you share some examples from your E&Y experience?
A very good question, and I'm often asked that in terms of when is it the right time for me to move from heavily manual process to something a little bit more formal. And I would say there's 3 key areas that I would look at to help determine that. One is around risk. So do I have a comprehensive risk framework? Do I have effective reporting? How am I managing my risk? Do I have a process framework in place that can be automated into a solution? Where are my cost and value benefits from? Am I spending too much time manually collecting, aggregating data, which is something that we're hearing today a lot of folks are struggling with. So it's to the point where you're spending more time on the manual tasks and actually managing those risks and understanding what those risks are and how to mitigate and potentially remediate them. So where you're spending your time, aggregating as opposed to really understanding, as opposed to getting that holistic view of risk across the enterprise, and not having that ability to have access to real-time view of where you are. So I would say those would be the areas to think about as you're looking to move from very manual to a software. I've seen different clients struggle through deciding when's the right time. I've had clients that have decided I'm going to move to software, but don't have foundational components in order to be able to configure in a tool and take advantage of what a tool can offer. I've had clients, significantly spend time on manual process, whether it's aggregating, collecting, reporting, using Excel, other tools, technology, and it's just taking the bulk of their time as opposed to really understanding what that enterprise view of risk is. Everyone will struggle to determine when the right time is, but it's when you're spending too much time doing the things that you shouldn't be doing as opposed to the value adds and cost and value. Do you have the funding, the budget in order to be able to support a move to software or technology?
Excellent. Thanks, Celeste. And Brian, can you comment in terms of, can an organization implement a tool too early? And what are some of the risks, if you can add to Celeste, of using software to administrate the ERM function?
Sure. Understandably, there's a lot of excitement that comes along with implementing a new technology. And sometimes that excitement and, hey, I finally got the budget, and there's a lot of emotion attached to it. And sometimes folks can tend to move a little bit too quickly. And if you do that, then you can run into some challenges as it pertains to what I would call change management. So if the technology isn't properly aligned to the needs of the organization, its processes, its reporting requirements, and so forth, then you'll likely get some pushback. And so to help ensure success, it's important to include key stakeholders early in the process, especially the light users of the system. They're the ones that will likely complain the most if what they end up being asked to use isn't familiar, isn't usable, and so forth. So it's getting all the right people involved, getting them excited as well as to not only how much easier it's going to be. We've talked an awful lot about efficiency, and that's very important, but also the value of the data and the relevance of that data to them. Why should they care about this new software? It's not really about the software, it's about the great information they're going to have to make better decisions around budgeting, around where our assurance resources to be focused on the key risks and controls. As Celeste mentioned, where might you want to put some remediation investment, and if you can demonstrate that the software can do that for them, that's great. So that's one aspect of it. And the other one is not so much pertaining to the timing or doing it too early, but it's just a caveat around making sure that your process drives the technology, and don't let the technology drive your process. So that means first and foremost understanding your process and requirements, and then assessing the various options, the various vendors and solutions relative to your process, your required outputs, and being a little bit selfish around that, because there's a lot of great stuff out there, but it's not great if it doesn't align to your specific process and requirements.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. And I guess now that we've determined we are software ready, the next biggest challenge that we hear facing risk teams is building a business case internally for software, getting the budget. So before we go to our panelists, we have a poll question for the audience. What is the most difficult part of creating a business case for software internally? Ollie, if I can get you to comment on the responses once it's up.
Thanks, Jamie.
So, Ollie, yeah, why do you think that it's so difficult to prove ROI internally?
Yeah, interesting poll results there. And I think basically this is very common. A lot of organizations are saying this. So the vast majority is saying proving the ROI and also securing the budget as well. We had almost 80–90% of people there responding. If we think about risks and the way that they work, we can think about the known risks and the unknown risks. And an organization, when it comes to unknown risks, it's very hard to quantify those events, those future uncertainties. With the current risk portfolio, you can say, okay, we have control around this. We know this is costing the organization so much money to do this. You don't know unless you're running a full enterprise risk management program. There could be a future risk that could come up that is likely to sort of turn into a crisis. So proving that ROI and securing budget as well, a way to get around that can be to build a business case to say, let's look at, has our organization had a really costly crisis that has impacted us? Or if it hasn't, is there a similar type of organization in your industry that has? And let's look at that, and let's dissect that. Let's use some form of analysis to look at this incident or this crisis, and what happened. How much did it cost that organization approximately? How much did that impact their strategy, their reputation, and what they do? And then think about the time horizon of that event when you're trying to build that sort of ROI or secure that budget. So you can say that was a crisis that occurred and impacted an organization, and there was a material cost. If that had been controlled as an incident and responded to more effectively, then it would have prevented escalation into a crisis. And even before becoming an incident, if that had been a risk and you prevented it from occurring in the first place, then you wouldn't have had that move of the event from risk to incident. So that's one way of looking to secure budget and also proving ROI, because you're effectively doing peer review and benchmarking there. Yeah, that's one of my ways I would show it. It's effectively, let's use proactive risk management here to prevent, a material crisis from hitting our organization. And software is just a way, like we spoke about earlier, of automating and speeding up that decision-making process. So if you're getting your data in and your data out faster, it will help your organization to make those decisions quicker and prevent the risks potentially from escalating into a crisis and that getting worse, or sorry, an incident and that getting worse and turning into a crisis.
Excellent. Thanks, Ollie. Brian, building upon Ollie's comments, what are the 2 tips you can provide to teams looking to build a business case internally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the recurring theme that I'm hearing this morning or afternoon, I'm sorry, is efficiency and impact. So it shouldn't be too difficult to come up with some cost justification that speaks to efficiency, looking at the number of hours, full-time equivalents, et cetera, that are spent to support the process end to end. So that's actually the most straightforward component of this. I think the one that really makes a difference, and Ollie kind of just spoke to that, is that of impact. And so, yeah, and then also thinking about, well, who holds the purse strings ultimately? Who are going to be your key cheerleaders that folks are going to respond to in the organization? And there I've often found it's 2 people. It's the audit committee chair, or it tends to be the audit and risk committee chair, and also the CFO. And as Ollie mentioned, it's avoiding surprises that could impact your reputation. And so a little bit of fear is not a bad thing to bring up, and the ability to reduce the chances of those and impact of those surprises. And then secondly is looking at, the organization is spending, depending on the size of the organization, often millions and millions of dollars on assurance. And on regulatory compliance and on remediation and so forth. And so if you're able to take the outputs of this process and use it to better focus those scarce resources upon areas that will matter, I think that's hugely impactful. And I guess I'll go with 3 instead of just 2. The third, I think, is we're talking a lot about ERM technology, but ERM technology is usually not something that sits there in isolation. ERM technology tends to be part of an integrated platform and an integrated approach to risk and performance management. So although you might be saying, hey, I'd like X amount of dollars to implement some software to support the ERM process, that business case can often involve something much more compelling to say, we're starting with ERM and we're going to have this great view of the key risks of the organization, how they're being managed, what we should do about them, those responsive actions. But then as an example of that, to say, well, a subset of the risks that we've identified and assessed, we've determined that we need some independent assurance around those. So let's feed those naturally into the internal audit plan. Well, that internal audit activity can also be supported typically by that same technology. There tend to be internal audit applications there as well. Or you could say we have risks that we've identified relative to regulatory compliance. Again, the platforms out there today tend to be holistic, integrated, efficient platforms, cloud-based, lots of really compelling reasons from a risk governance perspective to bring all of those activities together. And ERM is a great starting point. It tends to be a relatively low cost, very high impact way that your audit committee chair is going to love. If he or she looks at that report that says, here are the key risks, here's how they've been assessed, and here's what we're doing about them, and they're able to, within their board packet or their online interface to the technology, see how that connects to their internal audit plan and reports and their regulatory compliance reporting, et cetera. It gives them a heck of a lot more comfort that all of this stuff is working in tandem, that you've broken down the silos and you're doing it that much more efficiently. I think that's hugely compelling.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. Celeste, do you have anything to add to that on the clients that you've seen? in the past with respect to ROI successes?
So I think those were great comments that Brian brought forth, and completely agree in terms of being able to get the budget. Is you need to have that sponsorship, that buy-in from executives, and they typically need to understand what the value that you're going to get out of a software or tool, and where that gets accelerated would be where there's been an incident where something has occurred and there's been no way to track it, there's been no mechanism in place, and that certainly helps. And to Brian's point around pooling of teams and resources, where I've seen it successful in smaller organizations have been, I have my IT risk, my third-party risk, internal audit all come together to say, what, we're all struggling with different things around managing our risk. We're highly manual. We need a tool to help us, as opposed to just focusing on ERM. We've seen where different stakeholders have come together to make that case much stronger and a lot easier and palatable for executives to understand.
Excellent. Thanks, Celeste. Which brings me to poll question 4, which is, where does the budget for risk management technology lie within your organization? And Brian, if you could comment on the results once they are ready. It looks as though we have a clear leader of the risk management team actually has a lot of the budget. And the second response is, I don't know. If you could comment on those results, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, it's good to see that the risk management team, what I'm inferring from this is that the risk management team is getting the budget, which is fantastic, which is often a big barrier that the risk management functions in many organizations, if they have a dedicated risk management function, tend to be relatively small as compared to other key support functions in the organization, second line, third line. And so I kind of take it back to what Celeste mentioned there as well, is it's great that the budget's coming from the risk management function, but it can be a heck of a lot more compelling if you've got some friends next door in internal audit or internal control or regulatory compliance or vendor management or IT security, to get those folks together and say, hey, I'm looking to make an investment here to support what we need from a risk management perspective. Should we be looking at this collaboratively? And if not, if they're not ready, at least you can give them some early insight and allow them to be guests in the process, so that when it comes time to potentially integrate across those silos, those folks are ready and are bringing with them, the budgets to make it happen, which is critically important. If you really want to build out, the sort of holy grail of integrated risk management across assurance, risk management, compliance, and so forth, you've got to have everybody at the table. So it's another reason to involve those key stakeholders early in the process.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. And Celeste, can you comment on the typical timelines, and also have you seen some ways in order to speed up the timelines in order to get budget happening?
So timelines vary greatly based on organization. I won't lie. I've definitely seen different things, and as I mentioned earlier, things that will accelerate are having that executive sponsorship, having had a lot of those internal discussions prior to saying we're ready for a tool, and selling that idea to say we really need something. I've seen situations where, again, there's been incidents, there's been risks that have occurred, and no mechanism in place to really identify assess them very quickly, because either it was buried in an Excel spreadsheet and someone didn't get to see it when they should have seen it. So certainly, things like that, which I would not recommend the basis to do a tool. You want to be ahead as opposed to being reactive. And again, I think that where you can pull resources and teams, I think that tends to accelerate bigger budget and bigger vision and ability to really leverage across the organization. But timelines, depends on where you are from a budget life cycle. But it's really understanding what value am I getting out of a software, and linking that back to your business case.
Excellent. Thanks, Celeste. Our next question goes to Ollie. So once a company has identified a need to move away from spreadsheets to ERM tech, what are the steps to identify and assess software vendors?
Thanks, Jamie.
You, Ollie. Yeah,
cheers. And as you'll see listed on the screen there, there's a range of resources listed there. Just a cautionary note on some of these, that they are good resources. They're a good place to start. They'll give you a list of companies and what they can offer in terms of their software, their use cases, etc. But some of them are paid resources. So what you're finding is some technology companies pay to be on there, whereas it's not a true meritocracy. So you may find that it's almost like a partial data set. You're not getting every vendor that could be a good fit for your requirements. And that's a really important point there. Before you even start doing this, you need to make sure you understand what are your requirements, what are your use cases that you're trying to implement. And once you have a better idea of that, you can go out into the marketplace and have a look. So there are these various resources here. I find that something like Gartner's Magic Quadrant tends to cater to the larger type of vendor out there and larger organizations, it may be fair to say. Do get a second opinion before you commit to going down that path there. There's also review sites. We've got up here Capterra and Software Advice. So they are internet databases essentially, which give you a high-level description of different softwares out there. And they link through to the vendor's website. I find sometimes resources like this can be out of date, or it can link to like a legacy product sometimes. So just be careful there that you've got the most up-to-date information. And again, it's really important. You just need to make sure you understand what are your needs and how are you making sure you're assessing the marketplace correctly. Are you getting a good, independent, impartial decision there? Once you've identified some products though that you think would fit your organization, there's quite a rigid process that you can go through in terms of like project management approach. So if you think that your software ready and you understand what your use cases are, you know what your requirements are, let's think about, okay, which requirements here are the most important? What is it that I really, really, really have to have in my software functionality wise versus what is just a nice to have? So maybe I absolutely have to have this type of report, like a bow tie analysis, but I'd like a nice to have could be a different kind of report, like a fishbone diagram or something like that. Understand what it is that you're really trying to achieve. And when you go out and you ask these vendors for information from them, matching them to your requirements, you understand therefore which ones are going to meet those requirements that you find essential. And go through a process of that, asking questions to the vendors, down selecting. So you could start with quite a long list. I'd recommend maybe 10 potential solutions, down select through to a few that you think would really, really meet your requirements there. And then you're starting to get into the kind of the demonstration area. So you're asking the vendors to demonstrate the product to you. I find that what's really important with the demos is you'll probably want to see it. If you're the project lead, you'll probably want to see it first yourself to get a good idea of, is this going to work? And try to get through the kind of the sales speak as well and really understand the functionality there. What's key is proof of concept. Okay, you know what is going to work for your organization. You understand your requirements. You know what you need functionality wise. Now try to get your hands on the software in terms of demoing it, like proof of concept. So you're actually going in, you're given a license, you're going in, you're putting information in, and try to find those red flags. So what is it that the software can't do? If you have an essential requirement and the software can't do it, you may not get that from a demonstration. And if you start to get further down the line into contract negotiations and you've committed to a product that isn't going to meet your requirements, then you may end up in a potentially bad situation there. So proof of concept testing, very important. After you've kind of okayed it as the project manager or the project lead, have a tailored product demonstration for your key stakeholders. So really get them on side. We've mentioned stakeholders a few times. We know the importance of return on investment. So get those key people onto a demonstration. Make it kind of a short one and tailored. So have a scenario that would sort of fit your organization, and get the vendor to demonstrate that scenario in their tool. So you could have a risk that's relevant to your industry, and they'll sort of show the life cycle of that risk in there, or an incident, get them to play that out in the software as well. And have it very tailored on, how is it that we're getting the information in? So how are we going to be more efficient in terms of that? And back to the reporting again, how am I going to make better, quicker decisions off the back of that? Don't spend too long, especially for that tailored demo, on the database part of the application. How are we prioritizing our risks? It's really about making sure that you focus on the data in and the data out there, and also give a chance for Q&A for those key stakeholders, because they'll really value that, and that will make them buy into the whole process as well, which is important for the sponsorship of this project. Thanks, Jim.
Excellent. Thanks, Ollie. With that is our final poll. This is more of a perception question, but what is the biggest barrier when considering a software implementation? And Brian, I'll get you to comment on the results of the poll. So Brian, I guess this one's for you. It looks like unknown or hidden costs are the top response for poll question number 5. And if you can provide some insight as to what that means, or what are some of the unknown and hidden costs?
Sure. I think this kind of speaks to making sure you get the right people involved early, because the unknown or hidden costs often come up with or come up through change orders, change requests, the elements that could have been known initially, but weren't ferreted out. And I think the reason that you're seeing that response as well is that everyone's heard the horror stories around IT implementations. It doesn't matter if it's risk management software or health and safety software, whatever it might be, or an ERP system. The typical are overruns in terms of time and budget. That's normal. And so you have to figure out, well, how far within that normal range do we want to be? How much, over time and over budget is palatable for us? What is our risk appetite, to use a phrase, as it pertains to those elements? I will say that, I've been involved in implementations that go very, very well. We just implemented a credit union that was up and running in 3 weeks, and everyone was delighted. But there are other situations where if expectations aren't properly set up front, people will be disappointed. So it's really, it speaks to investing the time up front to ensure that you have the right stakeholders involved. From a cost perspective, that you're working closely with the vendor to not only come up with a specification and an associated budget, but also looking at the things that can impact your timeline and therefore budget, which is availability of resources internally to help support the implementation, and making sure that you really understand the change management process, and that what you're buying is pretty well documented, so that you're avoiding those additional charges for things simply because they weren't documented, but were assumed to be in scope. So that's kind of a long commentary on that response.
Excellent. Celeste, do you have any additional comments to add to that?
I think Brian did a great job answering that question.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so yeah. So Ollie, did you want to add something? Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry for cutting in there. The other category there, where people were saying there was 29% of people saying there was it might take too much time from their job, and that is a really interesting point touching on there. And I think it really comes back to this project: is it a risk project or is it an IT project? And the answer is it's both. The enterprise risk management team, they're the subject matter experts. They have to be involved in this project, right? That's a fact. But do you have a mature or developed IT function in your organization that wants to own this because it's an IT change management project? There's no perfect answer to this, and it totally depends on your organization and the culture there. But ideally, I would suggest having a dedicated project manager, somebody who's experienced and understands both from an ERM perspective and also an IT change perspective, and that will significantly improve the quality of your project and reduce risks around, cost overrun, time overrun. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Ollie. So we have one final question for all the panelists. I'm going to start with Ollie. The question is, if I was knee-deep in Excel spreadsheets right now, what's the one piece of advice you would give me? Starting with Ollie, then Brian, then Celeste.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, we've all been there, and we know that the vast majority of the audience on today's call are still using spreadsheets. It's hard. There's a lot of manual roll-up that goes on with spreadsheets, but let's really think about where is the value. And one thing we've really, I think, drawn out today from the conversation is around reporting and making sure that we're showing that ERM is adding value to our organizations. Let's make better decisions based on our reports. And my advice would be fewer reports, draw fewer graphs. Excel is made to kind of draw lots of descriptive type of graphs. They're not all very useful. Think about what are the insights and what am I really trying to achieve? What insights can I draw out from my data once I've kind of put it together in Excel? What is it that I'm trying to report to key decision makers? Link it back to your strategy and your objectives. So have those reports focusing on that. And if you need to, tailor the front end so that you're drawing those, you can draw those insights out and get that information to key stakeholders and decision makers. Thanks.
Excellent. Brian?
I'll pretty much parrot what Ollie just said and distill it down to, get key stakeholders both rationally and emotionally involved. And those key stakeholders, I would say, are the audit committee chair, audit committee and risk chair, and the chief financial officer, and potentially other functional leads. And when I say rationally and emotionally involved, the rational is look at all the money we're going to save. It's going to be this much faster. We'll have this much more richness of data, et cetera. And then the second piece of it is the emotional involvement. And I hate to say it, but pretty charts and reports can make a big difference. We're visual animals, and so as Ollie mentioned, it's fewer but high impact reports. If you can hand an audit committee and risk chair or a CFO a simple, powerful, one-page report that says, here are the key risks that we have, here's how they've been assessed, here's what we're doing responsive to those risks, because the only reason we're doing ERM is to figure out what do we do about it, what's that the responsive action, and you can make that simple, palatable, yet powerful, and make it look good. That's a great way to help get them emotionally involved as well. Over to you, Celeste.
I agree with both Ollie and Brian, and as much as I want to say throw away those spreadsheets, I don't like them. It's tough to manage prone to error, and especially when you're aggregating, calculating, doing a lot of different things in your Excel spreadsheets, to both Ollie and Brian's points, where you can simplify, where you can bring out the key messages and make your lives easier. And I know, a lot easier said than done on my side of things. And as much as I want to say, go out, get a tool to help make your lives easier, it's not always something that's feasible. So if you do have to work with Excel, think about how you can make it easier on yourselves, on your teams, where you can simplify and where you can really show some of that risk data in a consumable fashion. And, as Brian said, make your stakeholders, I guess, bring that emotional side to your stakeholders as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Celeste. And so that concludes our panelist questions. We do have a few minutes for questions and answers. So there's a question, and I'm going to pose Ollie, to Ollie. What software allows you to tailor your risk practices and templates to your current Excel reporting requirements so you can grow in complexity?
What software? Sorry, Jamie. The question was, what software allows you to grow?
Allows you to, yeah, so tailor your practices and templates to your current reporting requirements, so you can grow in complexity as an organization.
Yeah, so any good ERM technology solution should allow you to do that. They should be scalable in their approach, so that when you're configuring your requirements, you can keep it very simple. So you could have a very simple risk process there, or you could have something that's like more aligned to an international standard like ISO 31000. Whatever it is process-wise, you should be able to build that in easily. The reporting engine, we've mentioned this before, make sure that you understand the implications of the reporting engine. Is it a native reporting engine? So the reports that you're building and generating to send to decision makers, is that already inbuilt in the software? Is it easy to configure? What are the implications of that for an administrator? Or are you using a third-party application, something like a Tableau, a Power BI, a Click, something like that? That's a different skill set. It can sometimes come with additional licensing costs, so look out for that. And then in terms of scalability, yeah, any solution that you put in place, you should be able to keep it simple, but also build it up in terms of complexity when needed. And as you mature as an organization and your use cases develop, any good software should be able to accommodate that. No software should force you to change your process, and that's a key thing with one of these projects. You should be able to fit your process into the technology regardless. Thanks.
Excellent.
I was going to add something very quickly to that, and is in terms of configurability. What can you do to make sure that it's flexible and scalable? Is to have the vendor show you the configurability of their workflow, the configurability of their forms, the configurability of their reports, and say, show me, if I'm an administrator, how can I go in and make those adjustments as my complexity changes, or I want to add an extra review process, whatever it might be. Have them show you the ease with which workflow, forms, and reporting can be tailored to your changing requirements. And then the initial proof of that is giving them a what I'll call a demo script. Say, here's our process. Can you represent, and we'll give you some dummy data too, show us how it's going to align to our process. I think that that's another really helpful way during the demos of your sort of shortlisted vendors, can help provide an apples to apples comparison of what would really matter to you, which is aligning to support your methodology.
Excellent. I do have some follow-up questions with respect to vendors and whether or not most give trials, and do they have any reporting templates that are sort of off the shelf. Maybe Brian, you want to expand on that?
Sure. Most vendors will give you a sandbox to play in, but the caveat I would put in there is, again, it's important to invest the time up front to say, if we want to assess your technology, we want to do so relative to our requirements. The vendors tend to be really proud of certain features and functionality, and they tend to lead with those. But really, what should matter to you is, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is our process, and giving the vendor the opportunity and also kind of demonstrate their commitment to say, all right, we're going to take the data that you've given us, the script that you've given us, and we're going to invest a little bit of time to customize the software or configure the software for you and perhaps even with you, and then give you some time in a sandbox environment to try it out. But involve the vendor a lot in that process. Get them to help build it with and for you. Get them to show you how to use it. Don't expect them to just say, "Well, here are the keys. Go for a drive, have fun." That could backfire. So again, yeah, I'd say get the customized sandbox, but also do your part by giving them some very clear instruction on what's the demo script. Give them some good data, and let them know what you expect, and again, that way you can have a nice apples to apples comparison across vendors around what matters most.
Excellent. And a final question is what does the future of ERM technology hold? We've heard a lot on machine learning, analytics. Can the ERM team draw on that from a technology standpoint? Maybe Celeste, do you want to talk about that question?
For sure, and this is definitely a great question and something that I'm having conversations with a lot of my clients are, now that I have a nice integrated risk management tool, I have a lot of data in place in order to make better decisions and have access to real-time data. How do I take advantage of that information, and how do I add machine learning, AI, to better, understand those risks, better understand my data? And definitely great tools, and there's a lot of advancement in machine learning today and in AI and the capabilities that you can do with data quality. So certainly helping understand what your data quality is, helping understand where you can go from there. And it's very interesting, and I don't see today a lot of clients that are there with necessarily their risk data, but a lot of conversations around that space are certainly happening, and I find it interesting. And throughout the presentation today, Brian has raised the point of how rich we are in our data, and the better that we understand our data, the better quality that data is, the better we are able to make business decisions or use our risk knowledge to align to our goals. So definitely interesting to see how and where that will go, but we're getting there, which is cool.
Excellent. Thanks, Celeste. So that concludes our webinar. We'd like to thank you, and thanks Ollie, Celeste, and Brian. The recording, the poll results, as well as our previous ERM benchmarking results will be shared by email straight after the recording or after the session. Thanks so much.
All right, and with that, I'd like to thank our speakers for their time and expertise today. A copy of this webinar will be archived on the Opus Ed within a few days. Please join us next Thursday for a RIMS webinar, Best Practices in Reviewing Contracts to Identify and Mitigate Contractual Risk. Thank you so much, and have a great day.